So, hi everybody, welcome to this section to increasing developer productivity and capability with Duet AI. So my name is Marcus, product manager within Google Cloud, specifically focused on our developer tools, working on Duet AI for developers in Cloud Code, and I'm joined by Shrestha and Emily today.
Hi, I'm Shrestha Basu Mallick. I'm a product manager in Google Labs, working on Code AI across all of Google's coding surfaces.
Hi, I'm Emily Roth, and I work for Wayfair as a senior software engineer on our engineering enablement team.
All right, let's jump into the agenda for today. So we'll start by talking about overview of what is Duet AI, specific focus on developer tools, then talk a bit about what problems this solves. So why you folks should consider using Duet AI, then move on to a quick product deep dive, and followed by a demo, and then a quick overview of the Wayfair journey, evaluating and incorporating Duet AI on their internal workflows, right? So, okay, what is Duet AI, right? So, as you folks likely saw in some previous sessions, the key idea here is infusing AI throughout the Google Cloud experience, right? So this means, yes, the console, BigQuery editor, essentially all the surfaces you may go to as a developer, including, for example, IDEs, such as VS Code or JetBrains IDEs, right? So the key idea here is to have models which support general purpose programming tasks, so you can do all your regular development on Duet, but they're also optimized for GCP-specific tasks. To be familiar with our client libraries, Terraform, all the dialects which are specific to Google Cloud, right? So, and you can see here essentially what it looks like. Essentially, this is essentially showing VS Code running Duet, in that case showing a code suggestion here, right? So, moving on. So, as I mentioned, Duet is a portfolio of products. The key idea here is building solutions which are tailored to specific personas or audiences within your team, right? So, here you can see the 5 main audiences. Today, we're focusing on the green one, assistive development. The key idea here is meeting developers where they are, essentially in their IDE, the code editor, and giving them tools which are AI-powered to help improve their productivity. So we can do the same with less time, less context switching, less overhead, but also enhancing capability and empowering developers, essentially allowing you to do things which would be otherwise out of reach or too complex. Imagine, for example, integrating a new API you never heard about before without having to spend hours going to documentation, learn about the syntax, and more quickly getting from zero to hello world to integrate it to my production application. That's one. Next one is the blue one is about assistive operations. The key idea here is essentially it's a chat within the Cloud Console, allowing to perform tasks typical of operators, such as, hey, help me understand my deployments or my infrastructure via natural language queries. Or help me get suggestions for how to optimize for my costs, for my performance, or for my usage. Right, that's 2. 3 is assistive data. That's very focused on data engineering. Essentially, imagine the person who spends a good chunk of their time reading or writing SQL query. The idea here is it takes the shape of an AI assistant inside the BigQuery editor, which helps you with things such as navigating your data sources or writing SQL queries or reading and understanding SQL queries and so on and so forth. The 4th one here is assistive no-code development. This is very focused on the enterprise to employee kind of use case. Let's say, for example, you are working on building an internal application for benefits management or some internal use case. The idea here is giving you a no-code interface within AppSheets where you can converse with a chatbot and get to running a running application, implementing business logic without having to write code or be exposed to code directly. And last but not least, assistive security. The key idea here is a series of features focused on detecting and helping mitigate potential security threats, as well as helping prevent lateral movements after a security instance. That's the overview here, folks. Today, as I mentioned, we'll be focusing on assistive development. The key goal here is the key features we'll be covering is code completion and code generation. Essentially, as you're typing your code, you may get a single word, a single line suggested in the context of your editor. Code generation, I mean you explain the logic you want to build via comment or via function handler, and you get a whole code block or a whole function generated for you, as well as a chatbot, which essentially allows you to, essentially it's a chat which has the context of your IDE and allows you to perform tests such as troubleshooting, code explanation, or test generation via a natural language interface. Sounds good. And one thing I want to mention here is Duet was built from the ground up with the principle of meeting developers where they are, right? So here you can see the IDEs we support within Duet, right? So the key idea here is, yes, it does support Cloud Workstations, Cloud Shell Editor, the native dev environments GCP has, but it also supports VS Code or all JetBrains IDEs such as IntelliJ, Golang, PyCharm, Rider, and so on, right? So all of this is delivered via the Cloud Code IDE extensions. If you install Cloud Code, you're getting Duet pre-built inside of Cloud Code, and you have the choice of using your preferred IDE here, right? Okay, let's now shift gears and talk a bit about why Duet, the key challenges we see Duet helping address, right? So first thing we see here is developers frequently find multiple friction points on the day-to-day, right? So here you have some numbers here, right? So essentially, developers spend too much time going through docs, onboarding is a challenge, having to find out how to get up to speed on a new code base or a new project, their knowledge silos. We kind of see these common issues here, creating frictions which divert developers from spending more time writing code and from spending more time being in the flow, in that productive state developers want to be, right? So that's the key idea here. I'll talk about some examples of specific use cases our customers mentioned, which Duet was focused on addressing, right? So first one here, let's say you're new to Google Cloud and you want to try a new API. How can I more quickly get from I want to try it out, I have hello world, I'm then evaluating some methods, and then I'm integrating the application, the API to production. That's one use case here. Second one is how can I talk about writing code. But developers spend same, if not even more time reading, reviewing, and understanding code. How can I help get more up to speed more quickly on an unfamiliar code base? Or beyond reading, how can I help my teams improve their test coverage without affecting my velocity or increasing my velocity? Essentially having proper test coverage and proper regression testing and a more robust testing setup for my application. And last, one which is AI specific, is how can I use AI in my workflows while respecting the IP protection and compliance and security policies my organization has in place, right? So those are some real problems we heard from customers, and Google in-house also had similar challenges we meet, right? So that's why I'm excited to say that Google is using Duet AI in-house, including production usage for day-to-day development. And the key idea here was having Google be the first customer of Duet, helped us build this faster iteration cycle, say, hey, let's see how those capabilities can play on the setting of a large enterprise organization, helped inform our roadmap and our directions for Duet, right? Finally, I want to talk a bit about the features we built on Duet, which are focused on the enterprise needs, right? So a common question we get here is, does Duet train its models on my prompts or data? Short answer is no, we do not. We don't even store your requests, nor the responses to your requests. The idea here is ensuring your data is essentially that Duet is a stateless service. Your data is not being used and doesn't have the risk of potentially being made visible to other potential users. Next one here is the data set used for the training data set used for Duet is using only permissively licensed code. Essentially, we try to carve out non-permissive license code, commercial license code out of Duet. On top of that, we also have a post-processing step, which anytime Duet provides a suggestion, if said suggestion cites codes at length from our sources, we say, hey, we flagged that on the IDE, say, hey, you have a citation here. Here's this code which is cited, the source, and the license impacting this. The idea here is giving you enough information for you to make a decision about how a code completion meets your security policy and also being able to provide license attribution in the case you use, let's say, MIT or Apache 2 licensed code here. Customers even have the option of disabling completely source have citation. Let's say if you want to have a more aggressive posture, you also have the option of disabling code which has citations, right? So yes, so folks, that's it for the overview here. I'll now hand over to Shrestha to give you folks a deep dive on the specific features you have on Duet.
Thank you, Marcos. So Marcos already mentioned some of the features, so let's go through them one by one. So the first two features are code completion and code generation. Code completion is what it sounds like. As you're typing in your IDE, Duet auto-completes 2 to 3 lines of code for you. And code generation is user-invoked. So when you write a comment or a function header, you can actually call Duet to generate a significant large block of code for you. Now, these features may seem simple, but there's a lot of work that goes into them behind the scenes. The first decision that we have to make is, what is the right size of model here? What we're trying to balance between is latency and quality. So latency is important. For example, if you think about code completion, if we don't show you a suggestion at the right time, you'll just keep typing on. And in general, it's a very poor user experience if you have to wait for your AI to help you. On the other hand, we want you to provide the best quality code, and at least as of this time, while we have very excellent small models, larger the model, better the quality. So that's a decision that we have to make. Then Marcos alluded to pre-processing and post-processing. There's a lot that goes in there. I'll just give a couple of examples. So for example, for code completion, you could have completion when your cursor is at the end of your code in the IDE. But you could have a scenario where your cursor is in the middle. So you have code before the cursor and after the cursor. So at that point, when we are sending that information back to the large language model, we have to make a determination in terms of how much of the prefix, the code before the cursor, and how much of the suffix should we send back to the language model. And typically prefix is more important, what came before is more important, but suffix is important also. So that's just one of many decisions that need to be made. Duet also sends back information such as names of your source code files, the programming language you're coding in, to ensure and maximize the quality of the code you get back. When the large language model sends back responses, there are many decisions there as well. For the model might send back multiple responses. At that point, Duet decides based on confidence scores what's the best response to show. Even for the best response, the model may send back a certain length of response. And typically, the size here is measured in tokens. Think of them as word equivalents. Now, the model sent back a certain length, but Duet may determine that out of all the tokens in there, a certain length of tokens are high confidence, high quality, and then the remaining tokens not as much. So then Duet might proactively truncate the response that came back from the large language model. So there's a lot that goes in here that Duet is doing behind the scenes and taking what's coming out of Google's foundational model and serving it up to customers for a much better user experience. This next feature here, Marcos already mentioned, this is a very important feature. So large language models, on occasion, rarely can emit code that requires licensing. Now, we have been very careful to train Duet AI on open source, high quality code. But even then, sometimes that code may still require license attribution. So Duet AI will show you the license and the source of that license. At that point, as Marcos said, you can decide what you want to do. You can use that code, but with proper attribution, or you cannot use that code, depending on your organization's policy. And this is where we're providing you with all the information you need to code responsibly using Duet AI. What you also don't see on the slide is that Duet also has a lot of safety guardrails built in to ensure that the code that's coming out is not problematic in any way. Now, In addition to code completion and code generation, if I had to list the top things that customers ask us for, code explanation and test generation would be right up there, in the top 5 for sure, maybe even in the top 3. Code explanation is what it sounds like. You can use Duet to highlight a section of code and ask it to explain. Where is that useful? Well, if you're reviewing someone else's code, either for review purposes or it's actually code that you won't need to use, that someone, in certain cases we've heard from developers, may not even be part of the organization anymore. Something like code explanation can be very helpful. And unit test generation is, Duet can create a unit test plan for you, and if you provide the requisite edge cases, it can even implement it for you. And where this obviously helps is writing unit tests is cumbersome, it's time consuming, but having proper coverage of your code is important. And doing that when you have a tight deadline can sometimes be a lot, and Duet can help there. Finally, we already talked about what goes on behind the scenes, but let's talk about it just a little bit more. So what happens at various stages as we go from model to Duet? So what we start with is Google's foundational state-of-the-art large language models. We then take it and fine-tune it on code. And this is, as we've mentioned, high-quality code. We have our, we have ways of figuring out like what we deem to be high quality, open source, appropriately licensed code, and then we take that code, we strip it of personally identifiable information. We will do some processing to make the code better suitable for an LLM, like stripping HTML to Markdown. And then we will train the LLM further on code. At this stage, which is the blue box you see in there, the large language model gets better at coding tasks. But then we do another layer on top of that, another layer of fine-tuning to make sure that the large language model is good for Google Cloud-specific coding tasks. So the answers are relevant to GCP-specific tasks. And again, we're using high-quality code, high-quality documentation. One of the things that we have to think about at this stage is we want to make sure that the model is better at GCP, but doesn't, as a result, perform poorly on general coding tasks. So there's a lot of playing between various mixtures of data sets to make sure the model is good at GCP-specific tasks, it's good at general coding tasks, and it's good at natural language tasks which are relevant to coding. The next step, as part of the GCP-specific tuning, is known as instruction tuning. The goal of this stage is to make sure the model responds in a way, the style of response, the length of response. So this is no longer about the content. At this point, at this stage, it's more about the style, is specific to what would be best for GCP customers. And what you use at this stage is a smaller data set, but it is high quality, it's hand curated, and a lot of it is written by Google Cloud experts. So these are all the steps that we take to make sure that what comes out of the model is the best response that our customers can have. Then, of course, there is a whole stage of, some of which we touched on, taking the model response, doing post-processing, adding the requisite safety guardrails, and all of this happens before the response shows up in your IDE. But now to see it in action, I'm going to hand it over to Marcos for the demo.
All right, thanks, Shrestha. All right, so time to show you folks a quick live version of what you folks just heard about, right? So let me just open here my screen. So what I have here is essentially CodeOSS VS Code running inside the Cloud Workstations. Just have the convenience of running that in the browser, but everything I'm showing you here, folks, can also get on your local IDs, right? So I think the example I'll cover here is essentially this use case, which is pretty interesting about Duet AI, which is allowing, let's say, maybe you hear about a new API or a new service you're curious to try out. What I'll show here is essentially, I'll write a basic Kubernetes application, a guestbook application, which takes inputs, writes text in English, and then add the capability to translate the text from English to Spanish by using Duet to help me integrate the translation API to my application, right? So let me start by taking one of the cloud code samples. Let me just go here, cloud code, new application. Just gonna pick a sample Flask guestbook application. Right, so here I have, maybe a quick question, folks in the end there, can you folks see this font size, or should I zoom in a bit further? A bit more, okay. Good, okay, thanks. All right, so what I do here is I got a basic application. Let's say it's my first time using cloud code. I don't know what this code is about, right? So, okay, so before I even starting to understand what kind of code I'm looking at here, right? So that's where Duet AI code explanation come in handy, right? So I have this large application here, not large, it has a few methods. What I can do here is select my code. What you see here is this yellow light bulb. Those are essentially smart actions. They're essentially actions you can perform on code you have selected. What I do here is I click on, hey, explain me this code. What you do is essentially give me a natural language, high-level explanation of what my code does. Right, so okay, so that's a Flash server, uses MongoDB, essentially gives me the gist, kind of gives me this mental map of what this application does, and teaches me interesting stuff. For example, Bleach. Bleach is an API for sanitizing my user input. Let's say I spend some time, I read through it, say, hey, now I actually understand the basics of this application. I know that if I want to translate my code, I will likely need to modify that specific messages method here. Right, so before modifying, let me just quickly deploy that to Kubernetes to test the application as is, and then modify and test the new version with translation in place, right? So using cloud code, I can click on the cloud code menu. I can click here on the cloud code menu, run on Kubernetes, select my cluster. In the case I have a ready-to-go GK cluster here. Click on yes, select an image repo. And there's a repo here. And let me try to collapse things a bit. So what Cloud Code is doing here is orchestrating all the build, deploy, port forwarding steps. So the idea here is I don't have to worry about running a bunch of kubectl commands. Just be taken care by the orchestration capabilities which are behind Cloud Code. I got an application deployed here. Let's say I want to run that. I can go to this development sessions menu Cloud Code has and double click on port forward URLs. What it will give me is essentially all the ports which are being surfaced by my application. I just want to go to the front end, so I just click on this, click on follow link. What you see here is essentially basic guestbook application up and running, and I can do here test, works. Let me just refresh this. So that's how you folks see it's a live demo when you get error messages. It's very interesting. Let me just redeploy this application. Deploy to my cluster. Okay, finished deploying the front end, the back end. It's now finishing the deployment. It's now forwarded. I can try it again, and I'll open this URL. And now I'll get past guestbook. I'll try test again. And yeah, this time it works. Essentially, it was likely some mess up with the deployment step. But yeah, by redeploying, it just got here. Essentially got application running here. That's the magics of working with Kubernetes. And all right, let's get to Duet now. So now I have an application running, no AI so far. There was some AI for explanation. Let me get into actually writing some code here. So I understand my application. Let me collapse this view here. I got my back.py application. I wanted to incorporate translation here. Let me open a temporary separate file just for better visibility for you folks to create a method to incorporate the translation API. Right, so I'll go here, click here, new file, temp.py. So what I can do with Duet is, let me collapse the view here so it's better for you folks to see. What I can do with Duet is I can describe what I want to achieve as a comment and use code generation to generate some functions and some code for me. So in that case, I want a function to translate text from English to Spanish using the cloud translate. Sorry, this keyboard is a bit hard to type on. Translate API v2. Just described here. I trigger code generations, and there you go. Essentially what you see here is Duet. Let me just zoom out a bit so I get the big picture here. Duet essentially suggests some code, implement the logic. Right? So it's not only generic code. You have here the library import statements. You have your instantiating. It's kind of doing all the steps which typically you'd have to otherwise go through documentation and kind of have to learn the API. The idea here is getting you from zero to running app more quickly before you have to make a call, say, yes, I actually want to use that. Once you decide to use an API, then you can spend the time learning about the methods and the intricacies of the application, right? So Duet also provides multiple options. So you see here this menu on the top. I can toggle between, say, hey, I get 4 suggestions. I can toggle between them and see which one seems to make more sense for me. In that case, there's a more generic one using Target. I'll just use a simpler one, which hard codes the language Spanish. The idea here is giving you some functionality when you're trying to pick the code for you to use. I press tab. My code was accepted. What I do here is I just copy the code back to my application. Let me just move this debug menu here. I'll just paste it here below my method. That's one. Okay, so I get that method here. Now I have to install that library. So I have to modify my requirements.txt file. That's where Duet comes in handy as well. So I can just open my requirements.txt. I can open the chatbot Duet has. Let me just clean up this history, and I can say here how to modify, or just how to modify my requirements.txt to incorporate the cloud translation API. And there you go. It tells me, hey, that's the line in add requirements TXT. It just saves you a trip back and forth to the docs. You just rely on asking questions to Duet here. You can see here how generation helps for those big use cases, but it can also help for those smaller and frequently occurring tasks on your development lifecycle. So just copy this, paste on my requirements.txt. So now I have the method added. I have the requirements going to be installed via pip. I need to integrate that method to my application. Right, so that's, for example, we have here my app. You have all these lines with explanation. I understood that I need to modify this route here, which has messages, and I want to modify this line here. Let's ask for Duet for help. Let's say, let me just increase the size of this so you can see better. Let's say modify my add message. Just click here, modify my add message function so it automatically translates this screen size is not too helpful. So it automatically modifies the raw data message, translates the raw data message, and boom. So what I do here is generate some code suggesting, hey, here's how you can modify your code to incorporate that. For example, it's a simple one here. I just say, hey, here are some lines for you to add. Right, so below .getJSON, I need to add this raw data one here, which is essentially translating my text. So what I do is I copy this. I'll paste this line. Oh, I need to copy this. All right. translating the code. And I'll paste this over here. Okay, so now I have essentially modified my application, have added the translation API, now calling the translation API to translate the raw data message my users are providing. All modified, go back to Cloud Code. I can just go to my debugger panel, click on the reload step. It's going to essentially start the deployment again of my new application. And within a few minutes, you essentially have the new application running, and I'll open the forwarding again, and folks, you see the application modified to call the translation API. Yeah. All right, it's deployed now. I'll just open the port forward URL here. Let me just open the size of this. I want to open my front end. Opening my front end here. Let's say test, hello world. And I click on post. Oops, doesn't seem to be working. It's odd. Okay. Let me just do one thing here. Let me just see what's happening here. So one thing Cloud Code does is you can actually open one of your pods to troubleshoot what is happening with it, right? So in that case, I want to open my backend to see what is happening here. All right, so it's saying the argument cannot be of non-type. Okay. Let me just do a quick tweak here. Translation. Oh, yeah, I need to do the return statement. Good point, yeah. Ah, yes, very smart. I copied, but I forgot to add the return statement. Good catch. Oh, Duet completes that. So, yeah, so dummy, I forgot to copy the return statement, and now it is, yeah. So now let's redeploy that. So what happened was I shouldn't have created a separate file. There was a separate file, and I copied everything but the return line, and of course, you're not returning translated text. So there's no way the code would work this way. Let's then redeploy and see it again, yeah. Cool thing was Duet actually suggested the return statement. So it's, see, it was a surprise demo of additional capability. All right, let's wait for it to deploy. More time, good. All right. Still deploying, waiting for it to be exposed. Port forwarding is set up. Okay, test, hello, world, post to guestbook. There you go. So then you get whole Amondo. Essentially, yeah, it's a basic example, but you can see here how even if you're not on stage with someone hinting you, Duet to say, hey, you forgot the return statement. That's the magic of code completion. Essentially gets the prefix and the suffix of your cursor and suggests the most likely completion you want to get in that context. So that's code generation, code completion, explanation. I'll quickly show test generation because we're a bit short on time. I just want to show you a thing which is interesting. Let's say, hey, you like this? Say, hey, I actually want you to deploy that. But I really don't want to deploy that without having proper test coverage. Right, I mean, at least you shouldn't be, at least some basic tests, right? So let's say I'll then go here to my chatbot, and I'll clean this up, and I'll say, hey, generate some, let's say implement some basic unit tests. Implement some basic unit tests for my code. So the idea here is all the tabs you have open on your IDE are passed under the hood as a prompt to Duet. So it knows this code means it's the actual code I have running here. I don't have to talk too much about methods or libraries. You can just use that natural language you have talking this. So yeah, so then you here essentially get some basic tests. That's nice, but I really wanted to test more about translation stuff. So I can say here, implement more tests focused on translation edge cases. The idea here is you can essentially have this, the idea is having this back and forth conversation where you can you can essentially describe the task you want to achieve. Good, so, okay, so implement, yeah, it's describing the task that's useful, implement, unit test, focus on translation use case. The idea here is to be able to have a back and forth conversation with the chatbot, and essentially be able to simplify your task of creating tests and increasing your test coverage here, right? So, all right, folks, that's it for the demo. And I'll now hand it over to Emily to talk about the experience Wayfair had incorporating Duet on their development workflows. Let me just open the presentation mode here. Presenter view.
Great, thank you, Marcos. Cool, so I'm here to talk about Wayfair success story using Duet AI. So first, a little bit about Wayfair. As some of you may know, Wayfair is an e-commerce platform focused on items exclusively for the home. If you take a look at my Boston apartment, literally every single thing is from Wayfair, and I'm not exaggerating. Our technology and infrastructure brings together suppliers and customers to create a market-leading experience for both through our supplier services, fulfillment, customer service, and the online shopping experience. My role at Wayfair is in our platform engineering team on engineering effectiveness team, where we focus on developers' autonomy, productivity, and experience. Well, so Wayfair's goal is, one of our main missions is to increase the developer acceleration through generative AI. Wayfair's goal is to provide engineers with access to one code Gen AI collaborator, given that it increases productivity and developer satisfaction. To do this, we are evaluating different code Gen AI assistant tools through experimental pilot programs. So I'm here today to talk about our Duet AI pilot program experiment. So we enlisted 28 software engineers and split them in half between those who would code in Python and those coding in Java. We then took those two cohorts, split them in half again with a control group and experimental group. So the experimental group had access to Duet AI while the control group did not. They were then given a small coding project to complete, similar to a take-home interview question that we would give out. And then once they were done with that, we enlisted 6 code reviewers to do blind reviews of both the experimental and control projects. So the code reviewers did not know if the project that they were reviewing used Duet AI or not. All right, on to the results. So the numbers on this page reflect how the experimental group compared to the control group. So the first line you'll see up here is the productivity metrics, which are pretty exciting. So we asked the engineers who were completing the projects to tell us how long it took them to set up their coding environments and then how long it took them to complete the projects. As you can see here, those numbers are pretty promising, and they were between 13 and 55% quicker than the control group. Using Duet AI increased their productivity. We then had the code reviewers assess code quality for all the reviews. So they went through all the project submissions, read through all the code, and produced the results we see here. So of the projects that included unit tests, we saw that there was a 48% increase of unit test coverage for the groups that use Duet AI. So this tells us we're probably more likely to see higher unit test coverage with projects or engineers using Duet AI. The nature of the project involved finding a certain number of results. The control group ended up finding 30% more results than the control group. Also, due to the nature of the projects, not all of the code submissions were runnable as is on the code reviewer's laptop. So the experimental group using Duet AI had an 18% higher chance of the code actually being able to run. They also had a 7% increase in code readability compared to the control group. Not all of the numbers are in the green for Duet AI, so we actually saw differences between the results depending on what coding language that the participants used. So for code quality, we saw a 31% increase if they were using Python, but a 22% decrease for Java, which was kind of interesting. We also saw that the 8% less chance of meeting all the code requirements. I do really want to zone in on this big red number at the bottom, which you might have seen right when I opened this slide. Negative 110% is a little scary number for code execution time. So this is the time it took for the project to actually run and find the results. What we found here is it actually is a limitation for our experiment. We had a very small sample size for this number. As I mentioned before, not all of the projects were runnable as is. So this left us with an even smaller subset to then calculate the code execution time. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Java projects in particular. After digging in a little bit deeper, I found that there was actually one Java project outlier that significantly impacted these results. So of the runnable projects, we had 1 from the control group for Java and 4 from the experimental group that were able to run successfully. Out of those 5 projects, there was 1 outlier that actually took 24 minutes longer to run than the next shortest project. So if we actually remove that outlier, we saw that the Java projects were actually 30% faster for the experimental group compared to the control group. So this taught us a pretty valuable lesson for our upcoming CodeGen AI assistant experiments, that we need to get a larger sample size so these outliers can't significantly impact our results like you see here. Next, I'm going to talk about our sentiment results. So once the engineers completed their projects, they were given a survey and asked to fill out their feelings towards using Duet AI. And these numbers were overwhelmingly positive. So the engineers reported that they were 30% more productive. They felt like they were able to work more quickly and spend less time on boilerplate code. They said they were able to focus on more satisfying work, and that work took less mental effort. They did report that they felt less in the flow and a little bit more frustrated when coding. Prior to working on these projects, the experimental group was given a quick tutorial on how to use Duet AI, but not real formal training. So we kind of chalked this number up to, this is their first time really using the tool, didn't have a lot of experience, a little unfamiliar with it. So we predict that as they gain more familiarity and are continuing to use Duet AI in their day-to-day jobs, that those numbers will increase as well. So we're definitely interested in tracking sentiment over time. So after analyzing all of these results, we recommended that Wayfair enables Duet AI for our engineers, given its increases in developer velocity, code readability, and satisfaction. Engineers at Wayfair are able to self-select one CodeGen AI assistant. We are evaluating multiple options, but right now Duet AI is the only one that we have approved so far. So we're really excited to get our engineers on it. We are monitoring our existing DORA metrics to measure Duet AI's success over time. As more engineers get their hands on Duet AI, we predict that it will positively impact our DORA metrics. We're also currently working with the Duet AI team to add an additional interloop productivity metric so that we can continue to evaluate Duet AI's ROI. So I was pretty excited to hear about some of the new features coming out for Duet AI over the next year or so. My hope is that other companies can follow our lead by running CodeGen AI assisted experiments to find the right tools for your developers to increase their productivity and satisfaction as well. So thank you, and back to you, Marcos.
Right. Thanks, Emily, and thanks. Thanks, Emily. Thanks so much for the collaboration and for all the efforts about measuring developer productivity. As you can see, it's a nuanced effort, but it's something that's very worth it. It's a good way of essentially getting a sense of the bottom line impact AI is having our day-to-day, right? So, folks, that's it for today. Thanks so much for taking the time and joining here. As you folks saw, Duet is a tool you can install in your IDs and helps you increase your productivity as well as empower your developers. And you can try it out by going to cloud.google.com/earlyaccess/Duet AI. I know time is short. We'll be out taking questions because I think we are at time here, right? So thanks, everybody.